This is Citlali. You might wonder, how did such an expert diviner get this drunk? How did the same person who has just summarized our entire ongoing journey with just a palm reading end up not noticing that we could listen to her thoughts when she taught us how to use phlogiston? As silly as it may sound, the drunk influence is actually what sets her apart from the others as a renowned star in her field of expertise. The entire memeable sequence even led us to a crucial finding that was hinted through her meditation. And I must say, she wasn't just seeing red all while she was drunk. She was actually onto something, having predicted the occurrence of the war and the appearance of the fake sky, all relating to the color red. And if it weren't for this granular detail, the fake sky will remain even more of a mystery, and it's on us to have it demystified. Welcome, Dinalists! Prepare to spot the red flags because the court is now in session. Speaking of red, I realized that when Citlali foresaw the warning during her meditation, she wasn't just right about predicting the war that happened during Act 4. Red, being the color of danger, actually has crucial lore basis supported by recurring patterns throughout the game. Rather than a bold claim, the word Citlali mentioned might be what we need the most to get into the bottom of the nature of the fake sky. The shattered moon fragments, as we saw, might have been a red herring and were just an aftermath of something even larger. Besides, these fragments were enveloped within this glitchy red rift that we saw. So what's the deal with this color in the context of the fake sky? This color has appeared quite many times already in the game, such as the twins' encounter with the sustainer of the heavenly principles and the total destruction that Luin saw in the We Will Be Reunited trailer, just to name a few. But this type of red is also different from other red-colored subjects in Teyvat, such as Xiao's karmic bonds, Arlecchino's attacks, the red-colored weapons, and the pyro element, even though that one is already close to orange. This specific type of red is what I would prefer to call crimson red. Though you might ask, but Merc, aren't Arlecchino's attacks crimson red? How are they different? Arlecchino is in fact a perfect example on how we can identify the significance of this particular color. In the song Burning in the Embers trailer, we see this different crimson red when Arlecchino blasted Crucibina. This would be the same different crimson red during her ult animation, as well as the cutscene exclusive one where she restricted the Traveler's movements. The crimson red that we are trying to identify can be seen in her idol, in her X-shaped pupil, and in the crimson moon background in her ultimate. What's noteworthy about these is that we can actually start picking up lore hints from these things, and it's not only limited to Arlecchino herself, but it also shows us the recurring patterns often used in referencing Khaenri'ah, the heavenly principles, and even the abyss to some extent. If you pay attention to her idols, one of them shows her glitching a lot followed by a shush pose at the end. Glitches aren't really a usual effect that you would see in Genshin's thematic setting, but they use it as a way to tell us that whatever the glitches come with indicate that it involves something alien, something otherworldly different. It makes sense since prior to Natlan's Act 4, we have yet to confirm the claims of Vittori and Wanderer about the fake sky. All this time, we were thinking along the lines of them cooking something or them just being mad insane like fools they are. But after the fake sky showed up, we were made to question even our own knowledge about the world of Teyvat. The fake sky too is joined by glitches, but just as the collateral explosion from Mavuika's attack starts to clear up, it suddenly disappears. What's more interesting is that the shattered moon fragments were suddenly rendered in the normal sky, and I think we could attribute Arlecchino's shush pose to this in some way. For you Arlecchino mains out there or enthusiasts of her and the Fatui in general, you know that secrecy is a strong part to her character. Ever since her first involvement in the Fontaine Archon quest, she's never been the type to fully expose her plans, and she would only let people in her confidential agendas as part of intelligence gathering where she could benefit. What this implies is that the shattered moon fragments could either have been intentionally revealed or it were to some sort of giveaway clue. But if you guys think about it, if the heavenly principles are currently seen as the bad guys, why would they want to give away clues? Well, if we go back to Arlecchino, she also has this reputation of being someone you don't want to become a prey to. If I had to quote Wanderer, seeing her true crazy self will be the last time you will see her. And even the Traveler was put on her mercy when he stepped in to fight her during her story quest. Here, we can also bring up two aforementioned examples that relate to the crimson red we've been trying to identify, that being her X-shaped pupil and the crimson moon. So her X-shaped pupil is actually pretty significant. Arlecchino herself mentioned that staring into her eyes is ill-advised and that you wouldn't like what you see. But when she stared to the Traveler during their fight, they were transported into her Crimson Moon realm, to which the Traveler was rendered immovable.
A crimson moon? I can't move.
Note that during these moments, we can even tell that the traveler is already caught underhanded, and Arlecchino then remarked that he's not strong enough to beat her as they exit the realm. That tells us that maybe if the traveler is strong enough, he could beat her in her Crimson Moon realm. But what many seem to misunderstand is that the traveler wasn't really less physically or skillfully less strong than Arlecchino. Rather, I do think that it's the Crimson Moon that became a strong factor in the outcome of that fight. The traveler had no idea why it's there, and it's likely that if he understands the mystery of that Crimson Moon, then he would have a chance to beat Arlecchino. I would even say that the traveler is strong enough for withstanding that realm, because now it makes a lot more sense why staring into her eyes is ill-advised. It's because that alone can traumatize and disable anyone. It's enough to drive people mad. And the Shush post indicates that Arlecchino's power mainly revolves around the lack of knowledge people have about her, since if you happen to be the beneficiary of her true power, you wouldn't even have the chance to tell anyone about what she could do. So going back to the fake sky and the shattered moon, I also have another speculation which would be highly plausible if you guys consider it. What if only few, including us, are able to see the shattered moon fragments? By that logic, the few others would be among the likes of the Fatui Harbingers and the Archons. Disregarding the fact that it's an in-game visual feature included by Hoyoverse, I do believe that outside the gameplay perspective, it would make sense lore-wise that the shattered moon fragments being visible wouldn't be the case for most of the characters in Teyvat. Of course, we have no way of knowing about that by switching into the perspective of someone like Catherine, but if you're the type to find real basis on the sayings once you learn about it, you can't unlearn it, or once you see it, you can't unsee it, this is where I'm coming from. In fact, Genshin seemed to already support this, which is the reason why the people had to forget Ruka Devata in order to cleanse the forbidden knowledge, but this would be in an entire separate video. But the main takeaway is that while everyone who were present in the Act 4 war events have seen the glitchy rift of the fake sky, the perception or even understanding of it will vary depending on the knowledge of the individual who has seen it, similar to how someone can only beat Arlecchino with sufficient understanding behind the Crimson Moon. One evidence that also supports it is the fact that Mavuika is aware that it's something the heavenly principles are trying to keep a secret, as expected of an Archon to have that heightened knowledge about such situation. And for the masses who would have a more narrowed view on the context, it would be likely that they will buy Mavuika's explanation of it being an astronomical anomaly. And to be honest, that would work for humanity in general, since not everyone has the same amount of knowledge and awareness similar to an Archon. Unless they become really curious, that would be equivalent to choosing not to stare at Arlecchino's eyes. But for us, the Traveler, with all our VIP pass moments, knowledge would really be the least of our problems, since they are a descender and they can easily transcend whatever loss Teyvat may have. Now, if you notice, all the examples I gave share one common theme among each other. That theme is madness. It even ties with all the examples I gave a while ago, especially with the once you learn about it, you can unlearn it part. Citlali is actually quite the interesting case. We know she was drunk when she was muttering the red color of danger monologue when she was meditating. But if you take note that after she became startled and soon feeling the urge to throw up, alongside the fact that it's Citlali, the crimson red we've been referring to being the color of danger is starting to make a lot of sense in multiple lore angles. Citlali isn't just your average diviner, and I reckon that diviners in general are mentally average people. When I say mentally average people, these are the types of people that see something as it is without any occurring second thoughts. But since we're talking about Citlali and diviners, it's almost always a given that we'd be implying about the involvement of sixth sense, intuition, or a more befitting term, the third eye. And so, I did my own research on different brain regions in relation to diviners and astrologers, involvement of intuition, the influence of alcohol, adrenaline, and meditation in order to point out how exactly this crimson red and madness correlates. To start with, when it comes to diviners and astrologers, most of their thinking process where predictions are also made are based off of pattern recognition and abstract reasoning. But apart from that, as someone who also learns astrology, intuition also play a big part. We could simplify this into our context as gut feeling or sixth sense. For both topics of divination and intuition, we could associate two brain regions, the prefrontal cortex and the insula. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for most of our thinking processes, particularly decision-making and thought regulation. But the emphasis on this isn't really limited to divination or intuition, since almost anyone has a good grasp on their prefrontal cortex functions. What we are trying to look at, however, is how it also plays a role in judgment and reasoning, both in which, if you pair them together, accounts to the predictive ability of diviners and astrologers. Plus, when you look at Citlali, she's also a good reflection of the pool of functions that the prefrontal cortex is capable of, having having been evident in her interactions with Auroron as well as her reputation as a highly experienced diviner in the Masters of the Night Wind. The insula, however, is a bit on the far side from the prefrontal cortex, since its functions cover an individual's autonomic and sensory ability like feeling pain or being in tune with one's emotions. Intuition and gut feeling are also part of the insula's function, given that those are also autonomic. However, it would be different when one is under influence of alcohol. Initially, the insula also has a role to play with cravings and tendencies, and it tends to get activated when one is under craving, which is the case with Citlali chugging a lot. But then here comes the catch. As expected, when people get drunk, Citlali gets into her silly moments. You could even tell that more of her emotional side is coming out during those moments. But notice, the switch from her being drunk to her meditating, it might have looked like she was switching personalities or she was being possessed. But the two brain regions we just discussed were functioning actively. The prefrontal cortex was the one behind Citlali's entering to her meditative state. Chanka saying that it's a unique ability to only Citlali is actually her prefrontal cortex being developed extraordinarily. This is why I said before that Citlali isn't just your average diviner. During her meditation, the prefrontal cortex goes overdrive due to prior influence of alcohol. Again, as Chanka said, that her mind's at the opposite of sleep. This allowed her pattern recognition and abstract reasoning to crank up until she foresaw the war and even the fake sky, red arisen within that pair of eyes. This is where it gets interesting because right after that part, she was instantly alerted. When it comes to brain regions, the first thing that would come to mind when you hear the word alert is none other than the amygdala, which is activated during fight or flight response. That foresight of Crimson Red made even Citlali have a burst of adrenaline, making her on the verge of throwing up for the first time as a response. So just imagine if your average person takes that much information, it is more than enough to send them into complete insanity. This has actually happened before during Sumeru's Act 1 where the Eremite leader used the Divine Knowledge Capsule. Again, this is another example of the specific glitchy crimson red color that we've been trying to identify. But outside all those brain talks, it doesn't necessarily imply that the danger that is associated with this specific color of red depends on the person who has known about it. Just because the Traveler is a descender and technically has VIP access in Teyvat does not mean he'd be exempted from the people which are in danger with this red color. His fight with Arlecchino should be enough to convince you that it wasn't the case. There is something inherently dangerous about the things that possess this kind of color. And no, it's not the infinite amount of information that makes your brain explode, but rather the consequences one should deal with for dabbling on something they don't know how to deal with. Plus, stuff like the Cataclysm Sky and the Fake Sky Rift itself is being purposefully concealed by the heavenly principles and the archons, like Venti and Zhongli. Initially, I would think that it's only the case because Celestia wanted to cover up, but after discussing all about the examples I gave a while ago, I concluded that there is something more than it seems. I'll just give the benefit of the doubt and say that the heavenly principles and the archons are partially doing these to protect humanity by redacting possible information gathering in order to minimize the chances of total madness, especially with the case of the archons since it's part of their duty to watch over their people. But at the same time, there are also two possible ulterior motives. One has something to do with secrets, and the other has something to do with some power that makes the Crimson Red dangerous. Picture it like this. If you have a crime scene where you suspect that you are related to one of its victims, yet some police officer tries to dissuade you from taking a look because of certain restrictions, you couldn't help but have additional suspicions about the situation. Why is the police doing that? Why are they trying to dissuade you that much? Could they be hiding something? While yes, the purpose of restricting crime scenes from non-authorized personnel is to ensure the safety of such people, this can also be one of the most clever ways you can cover up your own wrongdoings, especially if you're in a position of authority. The Shattered Moon fragments would be the crime scene and the red energy surrounding it is the heavenly principles' way of concealment. They are hiding a secret, that maybe whatever happened to that moon wasn't due to the abyss or some natural calamity. Whatever happened in the entirety of Teyvat and Conria maybe wasn't due to the sinners, the abyss, or their alchemical and technological advancements. It raised the possibility that maybe out of all those events, the heavenly principles and their associates instigated the crime scene. But that alone might rouse a counter-argument that I'm just boldly accusing the primordial one, and so this is where the dangerous power comes in. So apart from the Crimson Red being a form of concealment to cover up their possible secrets, those functions wouldn't be possible without this dangerous power. I would call it the ability to reshape. In many cases, Genshin has been repeatedly implying the nature of war where the victors burn bright or earn the right to reshape the world. Considering how the primordial one and his shades triumphed over the dragon Dragon Sovereigns, I wouldn't say that reshaping the world is only limited to its physical properties. Let's use the elements as the primary example. During the bishop's rulership of Teyvat, which is just the time where it's still the light realm, elements are expressed as raw power. Elements used to be something that wouldn't be conducive for the cohabitation of humans. But since the primordial one's victory over the dragons, times have gone by and Teyvat is now at the era where there are lots of people that can manipulate the elements through their visions. They also reshape the elements, but more on the way it's expressed, given that they have attached ideals connected to the Archon. The ability to reshape does not only affect the physical reality, but also the conceptual reality. This reshaping ability is the locus of any divine power that birthed the many concepts, systems, and dynamics that have been preserving Teyvat today. This is something connected to divine knowledge, and speaking of which, we also have one example of it that has something to do with the Crimson Red, and that is Scaramouche in the Shoki no Kami. If you still remember a story boss battle with him, there would be multiple shots being shown of Scaramouche inside the Shoki no Kami mecha with the red-colored energy. At that time, he has undoubtedly achieved godhood just as Azar and the Fatui aim to achieve. Scaramouche has acquired vastly abundant knowledge that required the traveler to have a Deus Ex Machina just to keep up. Well, that one wasn't exactly Deus Ex Machina since Al-Haytham orchestrated the plan very well to switch up the knowledge capsules and get the hand on the real deal. This was the one that contains memories and experiences that was directly connected to Irminsul and Rukkhadevata. But while Scaramouche did become a de facto Archon with the utilization of the Electro-Gnosis, the sages actually failed to make him the new god of Sumeru due to the fact that the actual divine knowledge capsule wasn't infused in him and the fact that the Dendro-Gnosis was still under possession of Nahida. However, if the Shoki no Kami were to be the one that wreaks havoc in Inazuma, Scaramouche would actually be able to get back and even dethrone his mother, gaining rulership over Inazuma and even gaining the ability to reshape the nation. That's the kind of power embedded within that Crimson Red, and it's what exactly makes that power dangerous, with its capability to reshape almost everything, even the people's preconceived knowledge and their awareness about their existence. Talk about existential dread now. The heavenly principles are concealing those events not just for the sake of covering up, but they don't want to reveal their ace, especially with the unfolding of the traveler's journey and the siblings' progress on the loom of fate. Just like the Dragon Sovereigns condemn the usurpation done to them, the heavenly principles don't want the same to happen to them, and so they have to protect it with everything they can. Everything as to prevent humanity from becoming smarter and enlightened enough to repeat Kanuya's advancements and take their rightful power. Maybe it's Crimson Red because they're caught red-handed, or maybe Crimson Red is just another evidence that leads us to have the fake sky demystified, the only show that saves you the madness from the red herrings of lore. I'm Mercanique, and this is my verdict. Thanks for watching.